In a quiet forest in 1993, all was calm. The sun had fallen, and most had already fallen asleep. This was the scene that moviegoers saw on August 6th. The reception was swift. It was a smash hit. But the little-known details with the production would remain mostly hidden away for many years. In fairly recent years, however, the amount of production headache it went through would be the subject of much talk and shock. This film should have been a disaster. Yet, it worked. I am, of course, talking about The Fugitive. The movie, with its iconic improv dialogue and story, chase sequences, and cast chemistry, was and still is well beloved by movie fans all over. But if you were to ask what one of the most iconic scenes from the film would be, you would normally get two answers: the dam jump scene, and the subject of today's video, the bus train crash. This video has been a long time coming for me. I've spent several years researching this to the best of my ability and contacting the very few I could, all with the end goal to explain the full story of how they filmed one of the best train crashes in cinema history. So, without further ado, let's begin. Before filming can even commence, every movie needs to start off with a script. We now know that The Fugitive was essentially filmed and written on the spot, putting it in oversimplified terms, and production was, well, a bit of a shit show, one could say. I'd highly recommend checking out It Was a Shit Show's video on the making of The Fugitive, which covers how miraculous the end result was compared to the actual production. We'll only focus on the bus train scene, however. The script provided by the Internet Movie Script Database, IMSDB, showcases a few differences between what was written and what was filmed. The most notable, aside from dialogue changes, is that the train, while not described in great detail, seems to hint at only having one locomotive, and the entire thing was meant to derail after slamming into the bus. Of course, when thinking about the logistics of how that'd be possible, it's easy to see how that was changed. There isn't much to scrape from the script, so we'll move on to the next section. Now that they had at least a general scene in mind to work with, the crew began scouting for locations to use. The most obvious source would be the major Class 1 railroads in Illinois at the time, and in 1993 there was the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, Burlington Northern, Chicago and Northwestern, Conrail, CSX Transportation, Grand Trunk Western Canadian National, Illinois Central, Norfolk Southern, Sioux Line Canadian Pacific, Southern Pacific, Union Pacific, and Wisconsin Central. It's noted in articles and behind-the-scenes interviews that 5 different major railroads in 5 different states were approached. Unfortunately, there are no specifics listed.
The hard part was finding a private railroad we could do it on, and we were lucky enough to do that.
We sent scouts out everywhere. We would just to find the perfect location. We looked in 5 states, actually, before we found the one in North Carolina.
Regardless, all declined to take part, as they did not wish to be associated with a massive train wreck, even in fiction. This is a common trope with railroad companies, and can be likened to Amtrak opting out of being used in Silver Streak, or the Alaska Railroad refusing to have their name shown in Runaway Train. So, what to do? Well, one of the scouts, Lance Holland, ended up finding a small railroad in North Carolina that would perfectly fit not only the bill for the crash scene itself, but also for the related scenes following. This would end up being the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad, located in Dillsboro, North Carolina. This is where filming would ultimately take place. Deals were struck with Warner Brothers and the GSMR, and the date for filming was set for February 22nd, 1993. But now, while they had a railroad to film on, a railroad is no good without a train to film with, let alone crash. One of the easiest methods for filmmakers needing to use real trains is to either A. line up a railroad allowing them to use their active stock, or B. find resources for sale at a cheap price. For the most part, they went with option B. Warner Brothers officials and the GSMR Transportation Department worked together to locate all they could use for filming, looking at scrapyards presumptively throughout the eastern seaboard. What scrapyards these were are, unfortunately, pieces of information that has not been publicly released. What is known, however, is a handful of rolling stock was found and purchased at scrap value from scrap dealers, quote, across the country. The first one, locomotive 1901, was purchased for $21,000, with the second locomotive, 536, purchased for $19,000. The specific details behind the train used will be covered a little later on in the video. A final detail for this section, the locomotives obtained were completely inoperable and had already been stripped for parts when purchased, so they were essentially free-rolling husks. This can be seen in the final film, as when Kimball climbs underneath the 536, you can see the wheel has a single gear with nothing attached to it. To remedy this, the GSMR offered up the use of one of their GP7s on roster, number 777, to act as the pusher for the consist. So, with the train now in hand and a location secured, now began the phase of setting up the area for filming. Given the incompleteness of the script, there was uncertainty with how exactly the scene would be filmed. A solution had to be put together ad hoc and fast. The section of track selected for filming that was closest described in the script was a section of near perfectly straight track behind the main GSMR shops, which had a curve which rounded the mountain. Perfect. They then began setting up fake lampposts and built a cinder block shack and water tower. One has to question what logistical purpose this would serve on a real railroad. Now, to make the train derail, they needed to pull some movie magic. It's both easy and hard to actually derail a train, but it's harder still to make it derail in the way you specifically want it to. So, what to do? To remedy this, they rebuilt a section of track to install a switch with a runoff spur to a drainage ditch. Here, the train would dive down and slam into the earth embankment, therefore causing the most amount of carnage. While laying the track for the spur, they also laid a concrete foundation for one half of the track ties to rest on, and the other half resting on 6-inch PVC pipes hidden by a dirt ditch. The idea was, as the train was derailing, they would crush and displace the track, giving the train a tilt and add some angle when the cars would eventually jump off the rails. As this was happening, all of the rolling stock and locomotives were in the paint booth receiving their movie makeup, at least the locomotives were. What was decided on was a slate gray car body with red accents, red and yellow warning stripes on the nose and rear hood, and a warm black, almost very dark gray, underbody and running board. The logo was a silhouetted picture of the state of Illinois, and block lettering spelling out Illinois Southern. The first locomotive to be painted in the fictitious scheme was GP7 number 777, and it was used as a sort of test canvas to make sure the positioning and size of the logo and detailing was to Warner Brothers' liking. To add a touch of realism, fake weathering was applied to give them a more grimy look, and to give the look of a long-serviced, hard-working locomotive. Also installed on both the 1901 and the 536 were modified plates to act as headlights, or what the script calls Cyclops lights. Warner Brothers had outsourced the painting of the locomotives to be done by an unnamed third-party company, including the 777, although it was only partially painted in the case it needed to be used on-screen for filming, and the red seemed to be removed before filming fully commenced. Along with this, the GSMR had begun modifying a 50-foot flat car with a bunch of plywood and boxes to make it into a mock-up road slug. This was painted in the same scheme, though if one looks closely in the film, you can see they left the flat car body unpainted with the data tags and loading capacity information intact. The freight cars to be wrecked were simply patched with spray paint, save for the road number. With less than 2 weeks to go until 0 hour, things had not fully gone to plan, as they rarely do. One of the big issues that came up is Warner Brothers was still concerned about the logistics of filming the crash, so the GSMR and producers ran some tests with the 777 and some of the rolling stock. They did many practice runs and ran the trains at a relatively fastish pace. Next, they did 2 test runs where, on the 12th, they shoved the log car, and on the 13th, a box car, individually into the ditch to showcase to Warner Brothers that the derailment would work fine. Add to this, the special effects with the sparks to mimic locking brakes was also tested. This aspect seemed to work without a hitch. However, while the freight cars rolled through the switch perfectly fine, the PVC rigging installed under the sleepers did not function as intended. They were supposed to become dislodged or destroyed as the heavy train rolled over it, but it turns out that hollow cylinders are as strong as hell. So, what to do? The remedy to this situation would be to insert dynamite charges and have them go off when the train reached a certain point, as described in a featurette. This couldn't exactly be tested, so the result was to hope for the best. A second issue arose when they were setting up the lights for filming. The area got hit with a tornado warning, and it was projected to head down the river and towards the filming site. The crew had to evacuate, and they all huddled in one of the locomotives, with the thought process of, it's heavy, so it likely won't be able to blow it off. In a retelling of the story by William Mesa with the podcast Befores and Afters, he recounted how they had a remote-controlled camera activated by a switch in the hands of one of the producers, and jokingly turned it on in hopes of getting footage of the camera being sucked up by the tornado. It never did, and the warning shifted further up the mountain, leaving the film set safe, but the producers slightly disappointed. Another issue to crop up involved the bus itself. According to Kenny Farley of the GSMR, 7 buses were purchased for use in filming, and 3 of them were rolled down the mountain with varying results. The first bus didn't land on the tracks, the second one almost hit the mark, but no cigar, while the third one landed just right, although they would have to position it via a crane for the train to hit it at the right angle later on. Also, according to Kenny, they tested the collision with one or a few of the test buses, and every time they did, they had to bend or replace the pilots and grab irons on the locomotive used. Unfortunately, which locomotive this was has been forgotten to time, though it's highly likely this was the 777. On the production side of things, the stunt coordinator for the scene was adamant about using an actual person jumping from the bus as the train slammed into it, which, while cool, is extremely dangerous. The stunt coordinator wanted to use a stunt double and have him roll away from the wreck as it unfolded. Director Andrew Davis was almost convinced of doing it, but producer Peter McGregor Scott vetoed the idea vehemently. We absolutely are not doing that. It was probably for the best. Everything was mostly ready that night on February 22nd, or perhaps early in the morning. 10 weeks of planning, $1.6 million spent, 650,000 pounds of train. It was all or nothing. There was no option of a second take. There were 16 cameras strategically placed, several on the ground, a couple in the trees, one in the bus, and a few on the train. Due to the nature of the scene being filmed, these cameras had to be remotely operated to mitigate injury with the flying debris. The train's axles and the switch were all greased up liberally to give the smoothest possible ride. The scene was shot in 3 different segments. The first segment involved shooting an establishing shot with the full consist. They put 777 between Slug 478 and the 536. This shot only had a few seconds used in the final film, but with careful camera angle trickery, gave the illusion this massive, heavy train was running under its own power. With that scene now shot, it was time for Harrison Ford to do his thing. First, they craned the bus across the tracks and took the 1901 and lowered the headlight to be level with the bus, to allow the light to leak into the cracked and destroyed windows. They shot the scenes with Harrison Ford rescuing the young security guard and then escaping the bus. After that, they cleared everyone from the scene to prepare for the big moment. With 777 still between the consist, they pushed the entire train around the corner before uncoupling from the main consist and pushing the 1901 and Slug towards the bus. With a camera mounted in the cab of the 1901 and a camera in the bus filming in the direction of the oncoming train, the 1901 rolled freely into the bus, with sparks blazing and the pyrotechnics roaring. The commotion inside the cab of 777 has engineer Kenny Farley eagerly watching as the train slammed into the bus, virtually tearing it in two.
There they are. Come on, fire. All right.
The fire was enormous, and it's reported that it took around 7 to 8 minutes before anyone could access the cameras due to the intense heat from the flames. The train pushed the bus for another 300 yards before it finally came to a stop. The next part now involved the actual wreck, and everyone was on edge. This had to go perfect, or they'd all be screwed. The 777 was moved to behind the consist, a total of 5 freight cars and 1 husk of a locomotive. The switch was aligned to the runoff spur, and it was obscured by earth and leaves to cover the rails. 777 shoved the consist forward, and the cameras began rolling. Due to the 16-degree wind chill that morning, Kenny had switched places with his partner, and he was on the steps of 777 and pulled the cut lever on the consist. At 4:14 a.m., 777 gave one blast of the horn to signal the consist was uncoupled and freely rolling.
4:14 a.m., the Great Smoky Mountain Railway crew released the 7-car train. which was on its way to becoming one of the greatest staged train wrecks in history.
The resulting wreck was perfect.
The train, when it hit, the only thing that was broken was a lens shade, but it...
Well, almost. The train had meant to be uncoupled and roll along at 35 miles per hour, but the train had actually gained speed and crashed at 42 miles per hour, slightly too fast for the target margin. As a result, the detonation came slightly too late to fully enhance the carnage, and the cinderblock shack and water tower weren't fully destroyed as intended. And, importantly, one of the cameras, the one that got slammed by the nose of the 536, was buried under 6 feet of earth and had to be dug out. Everyone on the production team, once the cameras and lights were turned off, had all left the scene for the night. William Mesa stayed behind and spent the next 4 to 5 hours digging the camera out from the mound. In a later interview, Peter would go on to reveal that William had never quite forgiven him for that. Other than that, the camera and film survived. However, not all the footage was usable. Add to that, 3 cameras were completely destroyed in the crash. Ouch, the wallet. While it's widely known that a real train was wrecked for filming, there had to be a bit of camera trickery used for certain scenes, such as Harrison Ford jumping from the bus, then running away from the train chasing him down. These were done with insert shots on a soundstage, utilizing Intravision advanced front projection to show recorded scenes behind a smaller set Harrison Ford was on. What had remained a closely guarded secret for the longest time, however, was some of these shots don't show the actual train. In fact, there are a few shots that were done with, and please be seated when I reveal this shocking information, miniatures. Gasp! Now, I hear you asking, but wait, you just detailed throughout the last 17 minutes how they used a real train and wrecked it. Why would they use miniatures? Well, my dearest viewer, remember when I said that filming of the scene went almost perfect? Well, as mentioned, a few details didn't go quite right, and they needed to be replicated for the film. So, a model was built in approximately 1/7 scale, this is based on some quick calculations, though this could be wrong, and a near-exact replica of the section of GSMR was constructed. The models were made of resin, wood, and metal, and would be pulled along with string. Not only did this allow them to shoot the insert shots they needed when Ford is, safely, running from the train, but it also allowed for additional scenes to add to the carnage, specifically the destruction of the log car and the small shack. When finished, you couldn't tell what was real and what was model, which, on one hand, is a testament to good filmmaking, that it blends in so well. Although, that has also worked to its detriment, at least for the crew involved. Warner Brothers were banking on the fact that they had wrecked an actual train, and spent over $1 million doing so the fact that miniatures was used was kept hush-hush. In addition to this, a clause was added into the contract signed by the producers, so nobody could discuss it. For the longest time, none of the production team or the people at Intravision who worked on the models themselves were allowed to talk about the miniatures. Quite scummy of Warner Brothers to do so, the episode of It Was a Shit Show just talks about this in good detail, and I highly recommend checking it out. Add to this, the podcast Befores and Afters has an interview with William Mesa about this very subject, of which the former included snippets of. One final note about the insert shots. When Harrison jumped into the ditch as the 536 bears down on him, he injured his knee, but the explosive charge to kick up the dirt went off too late. Harrison refused to do a second take, telling the crew, "You're gonna have to live with the take you got," before walking painfully back to his trailer. He refused to give it a second thought until Peter McGregor Scott was able to talk to Ford and bring him down, and eventually he agreed to do a second take, which went perfectly. Finally, the part of the video I'm most excited about! There's a lot to cover in this, and it's been a long time coming. There are some more obvious details available to the public, but it mainly pertains to the locomotives used, and discussion rarely occurs on the rest of the train. It should be noted, while extensive research on every piece of rolling stock has been done, it still is unfortunately incomplete. The crews were under strict monitoring from Warner Brothers, and external photography was strictly prohibited. In several calls to the crew of the GSMR, it was revealed that not many records, if any, exist on the origins of the rolling stock. But I hope this still sheds some light onto some of the more obscure facts about the train used. Without further ado, let's begin. The first locomotive used in the train is none other than General Electric U-18B number 1901. This locomotive was built for the Seaboard Coast Line in March of 1973 as their 301. This U-18B is notable because of the FB2 type trucks installed, compared to SCL's usual choice of the Blomberg B. It worked for SCL, an eventual successor Seaboard system, though it remained in SCL paint. In 1986, it was patched for successor CSX Transportation as their 1901, and later on was given the pre-YN1 blue and gray paint scheme, also known as the Stealth scheme. It eventually suffered a catastrophic crankshaft failure that took it out of service, and it was retired. It was stripped for usable parts, including the horn, and was awaiting scrapping when it was purchased for use in filming. If one visits the wreck today, you might be able to see the blue CSX logo fading through the rusting, peeling paint. The second locomotive really isn't a locomotive at all. As mentioned, it's a modified 50-foot flat car turned into a road slug, which is fitting for the 1901 as the SCL used road slugs all the time. Unfortunately, information is scarce and no original owner or road number can be seen in the film, and reportedly the flat car was sold off to be used as a road bridge. But not all is lost. In some rare behind-the-scenes photos of the models being filmed, there is a photo of the 478's model being prepped and painted, and if you were to look close enough, you can see the reporting marks WAB, hinting that this flat car is of Wabash origins. The number series the 478 would have fallen into is a group of 60-foot General Steel Castings flat cars the Wabash owned, and therefore is not part of that group. Coincidentally, the Fort Wayne Railway Historical Society owns a Wabash flat car that is 50 foot and looks the part. The third locomotive, and arguably the most unique of the bunch, is Electromotive Diesel GP30 number 536. This GP30 is iconic enough with its distinctive humpback roof design, made all the more unique with this being a high short hood variant. Only two railroads ordered this specific design of GP30, the Southern Railway and the Norfolk and Western, of which the 536 was built for in June of 1962. It served on the Norfolk and Western for a majority of its life until 1982, when both aforementioned railroads merged to create the Norfolk Southern. At some point in its life, it was updated from the full Norfolk and Western lettering and hamburger logo to the simplified NW block scheme. It worked for successor Norfolk Southern under the same number until it would suffer a simultaneous prime mover and generator failure, which would take it out of service permanently. Like with the 1901, all usable parts were stripped and it was sold for scrap until purchased for filming. If one looks at the locomotive as done up for filming, you'll notice the iconic bell is missing, instead replaced with a modified headlight casing. This was supposed to be active on the night of filming, but didn't. Also an oddity, it has two firecracker antennas, one on top of the cab and another on the nose. When people, mainly rail fans, hear the number 777, their mind immediately jumps to the movie Unstoppable and the Canadian Pacific AC 4400 CW painted up as the Allegheny and West Virginia Railroad number 777. That's not the case here. The Fugitive did it first. This GP7 was originally built as Union Pacific GP9 number 277 in September of 1954. It would work for UP until September 1976 when it was sold to Precision National Corp, or PNC, who in turn would sell it to the Chicago and Northwestern 7 months later. It was sold without a prime mover, so CNW rebuilt it to a GP7R and renumbered it to their 4382. It worked for CNW until April 1990 when it was retired and sold to Relco, where its nose was chopped and then it was leased, then sold, to the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad for excursion service. This won't be the last time we talk about 777 though, so stay tuned. The first freight car in the consist is this tanker, which in reality is a custom fabricated tank welded onto a 40-foot flat car. Beyond that, nothing is known about this car, other than it was completely destroyed in the wreck. The second freight car in the consist is the log car. However, this one we have a sliver of more information regarding. It's another 40-foot flat car, likely a sister to the one with a tank welded onto it, but thanks to pictures of the models used for filming, we can see that it's GSM 107. GSM, of course, being an early reporting mark for the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad. Also visible are the letters MW, which in railroad lingo means maintenance of way. So, the obvious conclusion is that the two 40-foot flat cars were MOW flats used by the GSMR. Like with the previous flat car, though, no original owner could be found, and there is no records to indicate who it may have been. I bet you're confused right now. What's this 60-foot chassis system boxcar doing here? They didn't use this for filming. And you'd be right. But, here's a cool fact for you, and one I've been waiting 4 years to reveal. They actually bought 3 boxcars for use in filming. However, they ended up with only using the 2. How do I know this? Well, you see that big black 3 next to the chassis system lettering? There's a similar large number 4 on the next freight car we will talk about. That might come off as coincidence at first, but revealed in a phone call with Eric Pittman and Kenny Farley of the GSMR, Warner Brothers had bought 3 boxcars and brought them over onto the property. Ultimately, it wasn't used for filming. My guess is due to the length. There were concerns that it was too long and might absorb too much of the impact energy. I don't know, and I doubt we ever will know. What is known, however, is that this is a Chesapeake and Ohio B-79 class of boxcar built by the Du Bois shops in 1967. It is now used as a tool storage shed. Originally built in 1963 as Atlantic Coastline 35810 and part of the O35 class on the Seaboard Coastline roster, this Pullman standard-built boxcar is number 3 in the consist. But you'll notice the giant number 4 I mentioned earlier. These were used for placement reference in the consist. In the film, this car was placed directly behind the log car and would be the car to bounce dramatically before settling to a rest. Notice how there's a hole cut out in the upper left corner for a camera. Any footage filmed from this perspective ultimately ended up going unused, but this hole can be seen in the final film. As of today, this car currently rests behind the GSMR shops for use as a tool shed. This near-identical sister car to the 635810 is also of the O35 class, although not equipped with the door-post lading anchors denoted on the 635810. This car, along with its sister, was originally built for the Atlantic Coastline in 1962 at Pullman Standard's Bessemer plant with the running number 35314. Both cars served under both railroads, and in the mid to late 70s would be repainted with Family Lines lettering, of which they had when purchased by Warner Brothers. The logo, lettering, and reporting mark were all patched out prior to filming. This car is a little more unique, as it was thrown into the ditch while testing the effects for filming, and thus was left with a bad dent that can be seen in the movie. After filming had concluded, though, the car would be salvaged and rebuilt into an open-air car used for the GSMR's excursions, numbered 697 and named Alarka. It was sold off to the Blue Ridge Scenic Railway in 1998, who then in turn sold it in 2008, where it's been missing ever since. Yeah. The last car in this consist is a bit of an enigma. In the movie, its running number is 749788, and the body style of the hopper is reminiscent of that of the Pennsylvania Railroad H-37A class of hoppers. Several were rebuilt into the H-37K class of hopper and made it as far as Conrail, but none have this number nor fall into any fitting number series under Pennsylvania Railroad or Penn Central. On top of that, the car is still on the GSMR today, just with the suffix number remaining, and still has the plain bearing style trucks, just converted to roller bearings. The H-37K class of hoppers, though, when rebuilt, were all given 100-ton roller bearings. So, for the moment, I'm at a loss for origin. Other than that, when filming completed, this car was still perfectly usable, and the GSMR converted it into a ballast car for MOW duty. Well, we are now at the end of the video. I've gone over all of the main points, so here's some quick-fire extra facts for all of you. After the mess was cleaned up, Warner Brothers simply said, "You can have what remains, we don't want it." So whatever was salvageable went onto the GSMR roster, and the locomotives and bus remains were kept on display and remains there to this day. The spur used to derail the train was converted into a runaround passing siding later on. The shack and water tower were demolished after filming. The hopper, boxcars, and 50-foot flat car had to be interchanged, which wasn't easy as they needed to get the FRA clearance due to the lack of functioning air brakes. Warner Brothers had Introvision pay for the creation of the miniatures, and when filming concluded, they wanted to sell them back to Warner Brothers to pay for the cost as reimbursement, but Warner Brothers said no. So, Tom Nod, owner of Introvision at the time, held on to them. He sold them to the Hard Rock Cafe in Las Vegas, then Warner Brothers bought it for some museum. Somehow from there, they ended up in the Planet Hollywood restaurant in Times Square, and then were recently sold to a private buyer via Heritage Auctions. And the biggest fact, the 777 would be fully repainted into the Illinois Southern paint scheme under an agreement with Warner Brothers for a few years, before being repainted into the various other paint schemes by the GSMR for almost 2.5 decades. The 777 would then suffer a cracked B-block engine, causing it to lock up beyond feasible repair. It was retired in 2021 with the intent of scrapping, but its career would soon come full circle. It, along with sister 711, would then be purchased by YouTuber Mr. Beast for use in a YouTube video. They were painted up as the train from GTA 5 and used for stunts before being taken off the rails and scrapped on site. A sad, yet fitting end to this little-known movie star. But her loss was not in vain, and the funds obtained from the purchase and eventual scrapping would go to the restoration of Southern Railway 722. Overall, the final scene we got in the movie is nothing short of absolutely amazing, and it still brings excitement and exhilaration to those who watch it even 30 years later.
What the hell was that?
A train? Are they on train tracks?
Oh my gosh! You're on a train track! You gotta get out of there!
Oh no! It just keeps getting worse! A train is coming!
Give me a hand with this van.
Seriously?
Give me a hand with this van!
Oh, come on!
Come on,
No way.
Come on, please.
Oh, it's getting close.
It's gonna be a close one, because it's cinematic tension at its best. Come on, come on!
Get out!
Get out, get out, get out, get out!
Jump, jump, jump!
You better jump!
That was very last second.
Oh, that could have been bad.
Oh no!
Oh! It's still bad.
That was honestly fantastic. Oh, the whole train derailed.
This is so destructive.
Go left, go left. Stop running straight.
Whoa. Whoa.
So this movie definitely has some budget to it.
Holy shit.
Holy crap.
Wow. A lot just happened.
That just kept getting worse. Is a plane gonna come crash?
Right?
Is this the most damage ever done by one toothbrush?
Definitely some great practical effects with the actual. That looks like a real train they crashed.
Man, he
just can't catch a break.
He is lucky to be alive.
That was a fantastic scene, honestly. Someone was commenting on my channel recently saying, cinema should be art and not just entertainment. And there's a place for that, sure. But like, sometimes I want to go to a theme park, not a museum. This movie probably falls somewhere in between on that spectrum, but it's fun so far. I'm having a great time.
While this may not be the 100% complete story, hopefully this brings to light many details not previously known, and maybe someone somewhere, someday, somehow is able to dig up the few missing puzzle pieces we have and complete the story. I hope you enjoyed this probably long video. Please go check out the GSMR, they're genuinely a great railroad. And special thank you to Eric Pittman, Kenny Farley, Tony Franklin, and Tasha of the GSMR for helping me out with the research in this video, and being willing to let me interview them or guide me to the right people. They are greatly appreciated. As always, remember to stay hydrated, and have a good one.